All right, so hopefully everybody can see that. Does that look okay, John?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, okay, great. Let's get started then. So I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about what I do and what kind of paleontology I do. So when most of us think about paleontologists, we think about people who study ancient birds or dinosaurs or trilobites or ammonites, but I'm actually not that type of paleontologist at all. I'm actually really interested in how fossils form, so in the process of fossilization, because it was one of the first mysteries of paleo to me when I was a student at university, and it still is, and I still find it fascinating how you can go from, you know, having a living, breathing, moving animal or a living plant and transforming it into something that, you know, can remain in rocks for hundreds, thousands, millions of years. So I have basically spent almost 20 years working on fossilization and trying to understand how fossils form. And in particular, I'm really interested in not so much the bony parts of animals, but in the softer, squishier parts. So things like skin and muscles in terms of vertebrates, also the soft outer shell of insects. I'm interested in how all of these kinds of things can actually fossilize. And what, you know, these types of fossils tell us. If we find these softer parts preserved in fossils, what information does it give us about how ancient animals lived? So in a nutshell, that's basically what I do. I'm just going to show you some highlights of some fossils I've worked on over the last number of years. So I've done an awful lot of work on, you know, beautiful fossil insects such as these. You can see this is a little jewel beetle. They're still alive today, but this one is almost 50 million years old. And as you can see, it preserves beautiful metallic colors, beautiful yellows and blues. And a number of years ago, when I was a postdoctoral researcher based in the United States at Yale University, I worked on hundreds of fossils like these, and we were able to show that the colors we see, these are actually real colors. These are what we call structural colors. So they're not just an artifact of the fossilization process. They were actually produced by tiny nanoscopic structures, so absolutely microscopic structures in the outer shell of these insects. And these tiny structures scatter light and produce the beautiful metallic colors that we see. We also found that the colors we see today of these fossils, they weren't the original colors that they had when they were alive, that the colors have actually changed a little bit during fossilization. So we did a lot of work exploring all of that. And it was a fabulous few years because every fossil, almost every fossil I worked on had beautiful metallic blues or greens or reds. So it was a very colorful phase of my career. I also do a lot of work investigating the chemistry of fossils. So, you know, what chemical compounds and what elements are present inside fossils. And here what you're looking at a lovely fossil frog from a locality in Spain called Libros, where I've worked on, you know, on and off for pretty much 20 years. I worked on these fossil frogs for my PhD. And you can see, as well as the bones all being joined together, we can see that there's a kind of a dark stain around the bones. There's also some kind of white material in the back of the head and some fuzzy white stuff down along the body. So the white material, a lot of that white material in the body is actually fossil skin. So these frogs, they are terrestrial frogs, they lived on land, and they were very lucky, from my point of view, they were very lucky to have a layer in their skin that was rich in a mineral called calcium phosphate. And that mineral is preserved today, showing us the outline of their skin. And I'm also interested in what the dark, smudgy stuff is. And over the last few years, 10 years, I suppose, we've worked on this dark material, and we now understand that it actually is traces of a pigment called melanin. That's the same pigment that we have in our skin that colors our freckles and our hair and gives mushrooms their brown color, for instance. So this pigment melanin is everywhere. And it turns out we thought that we only really had melanin in our skin and hair and in feathers and things like that. But it turns out that we also have melanin inside our bodies. And we actually have it in our hearts, in our lungs, in our liver. And what was incredible was we found it in fossils. The reason how we made this discovery was that we found these pigments, first of all, in fossils. So, and what you're seeing here in the image on the right, this is a chemical map. So in this chemical map, the different colors show you where different elements lie. So the red color shows you where you have a lot of calcium. The green color shows you where you have a lot of zinc. And the slightly more bluish regions show us where we have copper. So we can see here that we have a lot of zinc and a little bit of copper inside the body, in a big blob inside the body. And that's actually showing us where the internal melanin is inside this fossil frog, because melanin is like a sponge for metals. It soaks up metals. And so we're actually able to look at our fossils using these chemical maps and figure out where these pigments were inside their bodies. Here's another fossil that I worked on a few years ago, and this is a fossil snake. It's about 10 million years old. And again, it's from this famous Spanish locality called Libros. And you might be able to see in that big image on the top, you're seeing pretty much all of the snake's body. Unfortunately, its head is missing. It's missing off the side of the slab, which is a pity, because if we had the head, we'd know exactly what type of snake it was. But for now, we can say that it's a water snake. It belongs to that family, the Coprolites. And you should be able to make out there's a kind of a funny pale colored material in between the bones. You can see it better in the images at the bottom. You can see there's kind of white stuff in between and lying on top of the bones. And in the image on the bottom right, you can see that it's actually overlapping scales. So this fossil snake preserves its skin. And when we studied the skin with really powerful microscopes, we were actually able to find pigment cells preserved in the top levels of the skin. And they were so well preserved that we were able to take samples from different parts of the snake's body. If you actually look on the top photo, you can see the little black dots show you where we took the samples. And we were able to work out that the snake, looking at what types of pigment cells were there, we were able to work out that the snake had a pale belly and a dark back and sides, like many modern snakes. And we were also able to work out that the colors on its back and sides were a mixture of light greens, dark greens, blacks, and kind of yellowy greens. So this snake had quite strong patterning on its back. And because of the green color, it was probably used mostly for camouflage, for hiding itself in vegetation. And here's another bunch of fossils that I worked on with colleagues over the last number of years. So here you're looking at 4 different fossils. You have Confuciusornis, which is an ancient bird on the top left. And then the other fossils, which are you're only looking at parts of the fossils. These are actually fossils of different feathered dinosaurs. So we have Microraptor, we have Bapiosaurus, and we have Sinornithosaurus. So 3 different dinosaurs that we know had feathers. And so a number of years ago, myself and my colleagues, we were interested in studying the feathers. And we wanted to look at, how complex the feathers were, what structure was preserved. But in doing so, we actually found something really unexpected. In the feathers, we actually found little white blobs. You can see some photos from the microscope there on the top right. There's 2 photos where you can see little white blobs. And those white blobs, it turned out, when we looked at them more closely, like in the picture on the bottom right, we could actually see what looked like cells. And when we looked at them at very high resolution with these electron microscopes, we could see that the cells were full of fibers. And these fibers are identical to the keratin fibers that we have in the cells on the outside of our skin. So we realized that what we had found here inadvertently, so completely unexpectedly, when we were studying the feathers, we had actually found dinosaur skin. And so this was the first time that we had found really well-preserved dinosaur skin. And what we had actually found were flakes of skin that had been shed from the surface and that had become caught up in the feathers. We had basically found dandruff. So this is dinosaur dandruff and fossil bird dandruff. And, aside from being really exciting and kind of funny, based on the structure of the cells and what they contain inside all of those fibers, we were actually able to say that these creatures here, this Confuciusaurus and the dinosaurs, that they weren't as warm as modern birds, that we were able to say that they had a lower basal metabolic rate, which is a fancy way of saying that their body temperature was a little bit lower than modern birds. And that kind of ties in with the fact that, you know, none of them were very strong flyers, so none of them would have generated large amounts of body heat while they were flying. So that was really interesting as well. I'm going to now just move to a few slides talking about, you know, away from my research and just kind of about my job and what I like about my job. So number one, the absolute best thing about my job is being able to go in the field and do field work. You know, I've done field work in different locations all around the world. Here's a photo of me in the field in China. I love doing field work in hot places. So it's about 40 degrees in the photo here. You know, I love being able to look at rocks. I love rocks. Being able to study rocks and look at the fossils inside and understand, you know, why the fossils are preserved in different rock layers and not others. Here's another photo in the field. So not quite so exotic. Here's a field location that I go to with my students, with my undergraduate students at University College Cork. We go to a fabulous part in the southwest of Ireland called Dingle, the Dingle Peninsula, and it's wild. And here we have rocks that tell us about, you know, what was happening 400 million years ago when two ancient continents were colliding. And these students here, they're trying to walk along some ancient lava beds and trying not to be blown over by the wind. And you can see the sea spray coming up actually from underneath. So you get to go to some pretty nice and exciting locations as a paleontologist. Another thing that I love about my job, and is a very close number two, I would say it's tied with fieldwork, is just looking at fossils. You know, ever since I've been about, you know, been a kid really, I've liked fossils. I've really liked looking at them. I like the feel of them. I think they're fascinating things. There's always this sense of wonder whenever you see an ancient creature entombed in rock. There's always this sense of wonder about, wow, isn't it amazing that this animal or this plant has managed to survive for millions of years and I can pick it up and hold it. So there's just this sense of wonder about working with fossils. In this photo here, I'm in Germany and I'm looking really close at some soft tissues. So I'm trying to find skin on some pterosaurs. So the big fossils you can see on the table there, those are actually some pterosaur fossils. And I'm trying to find little traces of skin. Sometimes when we look at fossils, we have to, you know, look in slightly less conventional ways. So here I'm looking at a fossil bird, and the reason why I'm on the ground under a table is because I'm using UV light. So sometimes it's really hard to find the soft tissues that I'm interested in, but sometimes we can find them if we shine ultraviolet light onto the fossil. And so here I'm shining an ultraviolet light. It looks white here, but in actuality, in reality, it was a fabulous kind of blue-purple color. So I'm shining one of these UV lights onto the fossil bird to try and see where the skin is preserved. And you might not be able to see, but I actually have a scalpel in my hand. So I'm going to try and pick little bits of the skin off to look at them with some powerful microscopes. Another thing I really like about my job is doing analyses in the lab. So I love using big fancy pieces of equipment like this mass spectrometer that you can see here on the left. This is a time of flight mass spectrometer. And on the right hand side, what I'm doing is myself and two of my PhD students, we are trying to get a fossil to stick to that vertical steel plate, and we're trying to clamp it in place with little screws and clamps and loads of sticky tape. And it really is a multi-person job. What we're trying to do is we want to mount the fossil there so that we can make chemical maps of the surface, like I showed you for the fossil frog. And another thing I love about my job is just talking to people about it. You know, loads of people are interested in fossils, and paleontology is one of these, but it's really a unique science. because it really has the ability to draw people in and to get people excited in science in a way that isn't particularly, that's easy to understand. Fossils are very visual, and we can they're very tactile, so they're a wonderful way to actually get people interested in fossils, interested in science, and lots of people have an interest in science. And this is actually a photograph of me at Lyme Regis, at the Lyme Regis Fossil Festival about 5 or 6 years ago. Okay, so another thing that's really nice about my job is just the fact that you get to travel. So here you can see some of the places around the world where I've got to go, either to do field work or to give talks at scientific conferences or to study fossils in museums. So when you're a paleontologist, you definitely have the opportunity to see a lot of the world. If it was by choice, I would prefer to have more places in the warmer parts of the world. But for some reason, I've ended up in places like Iceland and Finland and Siberia, for different fossils and conferences and things. So yeah, the geographic spread isn't necessarily by choice. Sometimes you just have to go where the fossils are, and just deal with it. Here's a photograph of one of these big analytical facilities that I travel to around the world. This is a facility in Stanford. It's a synchrotron. So it's basically a big particle accelerator. So you might have heard about the big particle accelerator in CERN in Switzerland. This is a smaller one, but what it does is it fires electrons around the ring at almost the speed of light. And we use these really fast moving electrons to smash into the surface of our fossils. And then we study the X-rays that are released when this collision happens. So this is one of the places that we travel to around the world. And often analyzing fossils, we think it's very, technological, and we think that it's very, white coats and masks and all that kind of thing. But literally, guys, sometimes analyzing fossils is just about how well you can use elastic bands and sticky tape and pins, because basically the problem is, for a lot of our analyses, the fossils have to be standing upright. And you try telling that to a slab of rock, you've got to stand upright now. So sometimes literally, whether you can do the analysis, whether you can do the chemical test or not, just depends on how well you can actually just stick things onto foam and tape and things like that. So you can actually it's very hands-on, it's a very hands-on job, and you have to be really creative and problem solving and all that kind of thing. So that's great fun. You also get to work with some really nice people. So here are just some of the people who I've had work in my lab, and some of them are still working in my lab over the last number of years. Various PhD students, postdocs, and visiting researchers. So it's just great. You get to work with people, and you're constantly learning new ideas from everybody and having great discussions and great chats. So that's great. But I just want to say that there are parts of the job which aren't so nice. Now, I love these two people. I just want to make that absolutely clear. But what is not so nice, you might notice that Valentina, here's Valentina and Thomas, PhD student and postdoc, former postdoc in my lab. And you might notice that Valentina is wearing a very warm jumper and a big blanket. We did fieldwork in China a couple of years ago, and it was so cold. It was -7 degrees at night, and we had no heating in the little, I wouldn't even really call it a house, in the accommodation where we were staying. It's absolutely freezing. And our only friend, our best friend during that week, is down here on the right. That's the kettle. That was our only source of heat for 8 days. So we used to fight in the mornings about, when it was -7, who would get to use the kettle first. So, sometimes you do have to go to cold places. You might figure out I am not a fan of cold places by now. There's other things like marking exams. It's a necessity. It's part of the job, but I can't say that I really look forward to it. And also, you do have to go to meetings. And, meetings are important, and it's wonderful to be in a university where everybody gets a voice and we all get to make decisions together. But sometimes, especially during coronavirus, when we have to come up with new ways of teaching and new ways of exams, sometimes the meetings can get a little bit much. But overall, clearly these are not big issues. And there's one other thing. Sometimes in my job, you have to do things that you're really terrified of. So in this photo here, I look really happy. And this photo was taken to promote our discovery of fossil snakeskin. This is a real life python. At the time of the photograph, it's sliding along my neck. What you don't know what happened next was it went down my top. And, before we took this photograph, I thought I really liked snakes. And I do really like snakes from a scientific point of view. But when we were taking the photograph, what I realized was I was terrified of snakes. So I realized that I actually have a thing about snakes, especially when they hiss and go down your top. So sometimes you have to do things in your job that kind of push you out of your comfort zone a little bit. So pretty much that's all I really have to say about, talk about my job and what I do. And I think now might be a good time to actually let you guys ask some questions. So I'll just stop my screen share.
Thank you, Maria. That was really fascinating. It was really entertaining as well. So I think everyone will agree with that. Brilliant. And you're obviously an inspiration for many. Going into my first question, I think you're inspiring me even more now. This is from John Vernon. My son is 12 years old now, and he's wanted to be a paleontologist since he was 7. What GCSEs would be best for him to take, and would he need a language? And what good college courses could he do? And is there anything he can do now? He has 3 apps on his phone, has watched every TV program we can find. So there's quite a few questions there, but what can he do now to get him on the right track?
Well, it sounds like he's already doing more than most kids his age would be doing. So I would say, the best thing in terms of, school subjects, let's do the official stuff. School subjects, just do science. Geology courses around the country in the UK, and it's the same here in Ireland. There's no specific subject requirements. You don't have to do geology for A-level, for instance, just science. Just have an understanding of the scientific process and how we study the natural world. In terms of other things he could do, I would just say, spend a lot of time outdoors, in the natural environment, ask questions about the world. Why are things the way they are? It's by asking questions that we really learn. As a scientist, one of the reasons why I love working with the public is that they often ask the really basic, fundamental questions that make you take a step back and actually think about things. So I would say at GCSE level, just science. At A level, any science subject will do. If he's really interested in paleontology, I would say, well, biology would be good. Chemistry is good as well. So is geography, but you don't have to do any particular subjects, because when you go into first year, almost all college courses will assume that you've no prior knowledge, and they start everybody from scratch, because not everybody will have done geology, for instance.
Yeah.
So,
are there any clubs that you could join? Is there such a thing as a paleontology club for youngers? So
there is Rockwatch. So I don't know if he may or may not be part of Rockwatch, for instance. So they have a website, and they used to have a magazine. I don't know if they still do, but that would be a good place to start. Once he gets into further along in school, there are a few grants that he could actually apply for a little scholarship to come work in a natural history museum for a few weeks during the summer holidays, the Nuffield Foundation. So you can find about that actually if you go to the Paleontological Association's website. We have a section on public outreach, and we mention how you actually can access the Nuffield Foundation grants on our webpage.
That's really great advice. Thank you for that. So next question is from Heron Young. Are there any records or mentions of fossils or dinosaur bones being found during the Roman times?
That's a really good question. And actually, we have evidence that, ancient peoples of from many different societies have noticed fossils, that have recognized fossils, traces of animals in rocks, and that actually there's theories that this is the basis of a lot of their mythology. In the case of the Romans, there are records of Roman nobles having mastodon bones and other a lot of stuff from the glacial period, actually having these on display in their villas. And there are also some fossil sites in northern Africa, near Carthage, and also in Greece that they noted, and they actually based some of their mythology in these places about giant ancient beasts. So they recognized that they were ancient. They recognized that, especially where they were big, and they actually based a lot of their mythology around these. So yeah, that's a really interesting question.
Thank you. That's fantastic. Next question is from Helen Garbett. I wonder if fossilized limpets have ever been found.
Fossilized limpets. So I suppose if we take a step back, at a broader level, it's really common to find fossils from that animal group. So mollusks. So they're really common to find fossil mollusks. This includes everything from limpets to mussels and clams and things. So they're really common fossils because they have nice hard shells. In terms of limpets specifically, I did look this up for you, and there are records of limpets from as old as the Cretaceous period. So over 66 million years ago.
Wow, thank you. Next question from Ben Baker. Is the sound that dinosaurs made, is it all guesswork in the films and such, or is there any science to accurately tell what sound they made?
So lots of dinosaurs have, bony growths on the front of their heads. And, they often have really complex channels inside. And there has been quite a lot of work actually looking at the acoustics of these structures. And as far as we can tell, lots of these dinosaurs with the bony features on their heads, they did actually use these, they were capable of generating sound. In terms of the precise pitch, I'm not quite sure, but as far as we can tell, they did generate sound, and the structure is such that they would have amplified sound. So like a loudspeaker attached to your head. Yeah,
thank you. I mean, it's funny, the Jurassic Park, the T-Rex, I think that they sort of put a lion, roar, an elephant, and various other sounds together to make that sound that the T-Rex made. So yeah. Okay, next question. If dinosaurs had colourful feathers, does this prove that dinosaurs could see in colour? And what was their eyesight like? And that's from Jeff Gray.
So that's a really good question. And yeah, I mean, when we study fossil colour, that's the elephant in the room. Well, if they were so colourful, presumably they could perceive these colours. We can't answer that question because when we look at eyes, to be able to answer that question, with confidence, we need to find well-preserved eyes with good structure preserved in the fossil eyes. But actually, when we find fossil eyes, so we often find fossil eye spots in many dinosaurs, ancient birds, lots of other types of, vertebrate fossils. All we see, the only remnant of the eye, is the pigment melanin that forms a black layer at the back of our eye that basically stops us from going blind. It absorbs extra sunlight as it bounces around the eye, helps us form a good image. That's all that's left of the eye structure. So we can't, there's, in terms of color vision, there's a very specific part of the eye called the fovea, and that's where our cones, a special type of eye cell called cones, are located. And those are the cells that are capable of detecting color. We don't preserve this in fossils. So for now, all we can do is just infer based on the colors of the feathers that we've reconstructed. All we can do is infer that they were able to perceive these colors. You could argue that maybe some of the colors have evolved just through natural selection, and not responding to what the dinosaurs could see, but maybe some other predators. When you talk about birds, but when we're talking about dinosaur colors, like Sinosauropteryx, for instance, had a strongly banded tail. All the top predators at the time were dinosaurs. So I think it's safe to say that they could perceive these colors, but we can't be 100% positive.
Okay, thank you for that. Next question from Paul Morgan. What's the closest relative to an ichthyosaur or plesiosaur that's living today?
I suppose really crocodiles. They crocodiles, or else based on the exact way you make the tree. Crocodiles, birds, reptiles. Yeah.
Yeah, it was quite interesting. I saw the other day that the chicken was probably one of the closest relatives to the T-Rex, which I find absolutely hilarious.
Yeah.
Okay, there's one more question that's been pre-asked before we go to the questions from the guys here. I think you've answered this with aplomb. The most fun thing you get to do in your job. I think you've covered that very well. How did you decide you wanted to be a paleontologist, and what did, I mean, I think you've answered this one. What did you need to study? I think.
Okay. So how I decided to be a paleontologist, you know, it wasn't a straightforward decision, because when I was a kid, I was interested in everything. I still kind of am. You know, I loved English, I loved maths, I loved art, science, music, sport. I just really enjoyed doing all the things that we were doing in school. And it wasn't an easy decision for me to just pick one thing to do at university. And I actually started off in science, and then I kind of did a wobbly, and I thought, oh no, I should be doing art, I should be an artist. And so I applied to art college. I got into art college, but then decided, you know, because the term for art college didn't start until 6 weeks after the term for my science course, I said, you know what, I'll just start back at my science course and for something to do for 6 weeks. And the first lecture on the first day was paleontology. And I just thought, oh my God, this is it. This is what I want to do. So actually, you know, it wasn't a burning ambition from when I was very small. It actually, I suppose, it didn't really, it didn't become glaringly obvious to me until I just hadn't had lectures in it, basically. As soon as I had lectures in it, I realized this was it. And this brought together so many different things that I was interested in.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to head over to the questions asked now. So this one is from Max. Hi, Max, how you doing? Are there any fossils in Antarctica? I think I know that question. I don't know the answer to that one. And fossils below the seabed?
So that's a really good question. And, you know, it would be, I understand why you're asking it, because Antarctica is a place today that is almost devoid of life. But actually, in the geological past, well, number one, Antarctica wasn't located where it is now. It was located further north. And also, in the geological past, the climate was an awful lot warmer. So we have periods back in Earth history, especially during the Cretaceous, when there were no ice caps. You know, Antarctica was not a land of ice and snow, you know, like what we see today. And so there are actually there are lots of fossil localities in Antarctica, and there are even fossil localities that preserve soft tissues. So there's a number of really important fossil localities that preserve beautiful plant assemblages, so beautiful leaves. And leaves are really important because based on the ratio of the outline of the leaf to the area of the leaf, we can actually work out, you know, what the climate was like. And there's also, you know, there's lots of, there's dinosaurs known from Antarctica, for instance. So that's one of the reasons how we can infer that Antarctica wasn't ice covered. We still have this major problem that, you know, even though, you know, Antarctica was warmer in the past, it still would have been dark during the winter. So why are we finding fossils of dinosaurs and other vertebrates there? Is it because that they just went there during the summer months when there was daylight? Were they migrating through, for instance? So there's still a lot of questions about, you know, fossil record in Antarctica.
Thank you. So the next question is from Rowan, aged 8. Hi, Rowan. What was the first fossil you ever found?
Well, it depends on whether you mean a true fossil or what I thought was a fossil. When I was very small, when I was, you know, 7, 8 years old, my granny used to bring us to the slate quarries up the road. We used to all wander, myself and my cousins and sister, we used to wander up the road with our buckets. We'd go up to the slate quarries, pick a load of wild strawberries, and we'd occasionally find things in the slates. And we found these beautiful, you know, delicate fern-like structures in the slates. And we thought these were fossil ferns and fossil mosses. And for years, I kept these samples, these little pieces of rock. And when I started studying paleontology during my second year of my science degree, I brought them into my paleontology lecture and I said, look what I found. And he said, come on, you know better than this. And I said, these are fossils, aren't they? I had read about these and they actually weren't real fossils. They were pseudo fossils. They're just little traces of manganese and iron and titanium oxide that are laid down in the rock where the water kind of seeps through the rock and evaporates. So unfortunately, my first fossils weren't real fossils at all, but that didn't deter me. I suppose, what was the first fossil I found myself? When I started getting into paleo, I used to go cycle around my local area when I'd go home at weekends during college, and I would look for building sites. And, you know, don't do this at home, but I used to explore, shall we say, they might have dug up. You know, the builders wouldn't be there at the weekends. So I just see, what rocks have they pulled up? And I remember finding corals and gastropods, snails. So those are the first fossils that I found myself.
Thank you. Which goes nicely on to the next question from Caroline. Hi, Caroline. What was your favourite fossil that you found?
My favourite fossil I have found. That's a really hard one. I guess if I can't think of one, I probably don't have one. You know, any fossil I found, I kind of have a soft spot for it if I found it myself, because you remember where you were, who you were with, what the situation was, how you were feeling. So I think I remember a lot about every fossil I found, and I wouldn't say that I have a particular favorite one. I know my kids, you know, they have some favorite fossils that we found together. Yeah, but I don't think I have a favorite. In terms of my favorite types of fossils, I kind of like everything, and I suppose that's the reason why I never really decided on any particular type of fossil to study. I'm just interested in how they get there. So yeah, if that answers your question.
Thank you, that's brilliant. This next one's from Emma. I'm studying illustration and have such an interest in paleo art, fossils and the scientific illustrations. Do you have any advice for someone wanting to pursue a career path, perhaps towards paleontology and this area after degree level? And she says, thank you for your talk, you're really inspiring.
Oh, that's so nice. So yeah, you know, I've worked with a number of paleo artists actually, and there's a lot of people are just interested in paleontology. So I mean, so if you're studying illustration at the moment and you are really interested in paleo art, I mean, you can pursue a career in that without necessarily becoming a paleontologist. I have some colleagues who I've worked with, paleo artists, and if you like, you know, if you want to contact me, you can get my email address online at UCC. You can always contact me and I can send you on details. But in terms of if you wanted to move into paleontology, you know, you would basically, you're talking about doing a degree in geology really, or you can also come into paleontology by studying zoology. And in fact, if I was to be completely honest, we have many paleontologists who come in from studying chemistry as well. So if you wanted to study paleontology, you know, you would go into a geology or a zoology degree mostly. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And that just nicely, in the marine theatre area, that James Mackay's puts a lovely presentation together on paleo art. So that's really worth watching after this, Emma. Thank you. We've got time for a couple more questions. Time has gone very quickly today. This is from Francesco. You had a collaboration with SLAC. Do you have, or will you have collaboration with ESRF? The ESRF EBS could open new scenarios of fossils.
Okay, so the reason why we do a lot of our X-ray work at SLAC in Stanford is because we have the facility there to put very large fossils on and map the entire surface. And the other X-ray beamlines at other synchrotron facilities, they don't have such a large stage. And also we're interested in doing analyses of light elements like sulfur. And at the moment, SLAC is the only place where we can do this. I am very open to using other facilities. So I've already done some work at Diamond, for instance, in the UK. You know, I'm looking into doing work in Paris. I could do work at the ESRF. It just depends on whether they develop a sample stage and, you know, a setup that will actually work for our fossils. Thank you.
Quite an interesting one from Kaylee here. With coprolites, can you see any evidence of what the dinosaur ate?
You can. So with coprolites, you can find different types of coprolites. There's some big T-Rex coprolites that are the size of a fire extinguisher. So they can be quite big. There's a very famous example, or I suppose a moderately famous example, that is about this. I suppose the study might be about 10 years old now. A paleontologist called Karen Chin, she looked at a T-Rex coprolite, and she found actually fragments of muscle still in the coprolite, still preserved in the mineral calcium phosphate. So the muscle fibers, as they were decaying in the coprolite, they acted as a template for these minerals to form on top, and that's why they're preserved today. But it was interesting because, you know, you're finding big chunks of muscle in the coprolite that actually told us something very interesting about how T-Rex processed its food, and it basically meant that they have a very short residence time. So you know, and very fast, you know, the actual digestion process was very fast, and that food didn't reside in the gut for a long time, just like many modern carnivores. So that was really interesting to see that similar kind of state of their digestive system in, you know, T-Rex compared with animals today.
And that's it. That's all the questions that have been asked, Dave. So thank you for that. And Rowan has put a comment here. Thank you so much for such an interesting talk and to learn such a lot. And I absolutely agree. Couldn't agree more. Thank you very, very much, Maria. You've been brilliant. It's so entertaining. And thank you for kicking off the virtual Fossil Festival with such a great talk.
Thanks very much, Sean, and thank you everybody for all your questions. Yeah, you know, like keep up the interest, and yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, there's another talk in about 20-25 minutes. If you go to the Marine Theatre area, you can look at the talk. It's for Jurassic Airways, and I'll see you there. Thank you very much, everyone, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the weekend, and see you soon.